Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to the February 20th, 2010 episode of Counter-Racist Evolving Engineer. The acronym for the program is CREE, C-R-E-E, and that is my handle. Today, we have for the second time on the CREE radio show, Mr. Neely Fuller, the author of The United Independent Compensatory Code System Concept, a textbook workbook for thought, speech, and action for victims of racism, white supremacy. I do want to really just start rocking and rolling as soon as possible. I only have one preliminary thing that I would like to say before we begin exchanging views, and that is that the purpose of this show is to promote and help in the effort to replace white supremacy with justice. The purpose of this episode, or every episode that I have, is just explicitly that. It is not, the purpose certainly is not an attempt to gain any sort of ally in a dispute with any other victim of racism. It is not an attempt to gain admiration by any person for anything that I might say or that Mr. Fuller would say. It is simply to exchange and share views, hopefully constructively, in the effort to replace white supremacy with justice. Now, as I put in the program description, my interest in this particular conversation, it will be no doubt a wide-ranging conversation because white supremacy has its hand in every blade of grass. But my really intense interest in this particular episode, at least starting out, was in areas 8 and 9. Areas 8 and 9, that would be the sex, the 8th area of people activity, and then war, counter-war. The last time Mr. Fuller was here was on June 21st, and I really regretted that we began talking about the 9th area of people activity, war, counter-war, and a caller called in, and I thought that the questions and statements that the caller made were good ones and constructive, but I thought it descended to a level where it was not constructive. So when it does come time for questions, if there are folks on the line who want to ask questions, I fully intend to ask Mr. Fuller if he will answer them. I will again ask that you do ask questions and not make statements, figure out how to frame it in the form of a question. But if it does tend to descend into something that sounds like a debate of some sort, I will do my very best to refocus the conversation. Before we get into war, counter-war, I thought we'd get into something a little bit softer, what Mr. Fuller has called soft communication, and that is the area of sex. I wanted to ask Mr. Fuller about this whole proposition that he has stated in other interviews, but he also has it in his book about asking prospective sexual partners as many questions as you could possibly ask before you get prone with them. And so I will begin my question, Mr. Fuller. Why do you suggest doing that? And I'll just leave that as an open question. Why do you suggest that people ask each other a lot of questions before they ever lay down and engage in sexual intercourse with one another?
Well, the reason I suggest that is because there are usually a lot of questions that are asked afterwards. And the questions sometimes lead into something that causes conflict based on 3 words: I didn't know. One or both of the partners who are involved with each other at some point will say, I didn't know, as a usual thing. I didn't know. I didn't know this. I didn't know that. I didn't know you thought like that. I didn't know you would do that. I didn't know that those were your intentions. I didn't know that at one time or another you did such and such a thing. You never told me that. And so therefore I didn't know. And it's I didn't know, I didn't know, I didn't know, I didn't know. And I have found from observation, and I believe it could be true, the more things that people know about each other in fine detail, the less conflict there will be, because people will know everything that is worth knowing before they engage in their first act of sexual intercourse and serious sexual play. And that's the reason for it. But the 3 key words, I didn't know. And that should never be the case in any circumstance. It shouldn't be anything that you didn't know. You should know everything that there is to know that's worth knowing. That's both parties. And then theoretically, and I believe that even functionally, it would work out that both people would then be on the same page on every issue because they have asked about every issue in advance, and they were satisfied with the answers that they got from the other person, one to the other. So that minimizes the, I have a question, but I never asked you, and I'm going to ask it now because I didn't know the answer to this question, and it bothers me. But if that is done up front, then you'll have less conflict, according to the logic, later on.
Now, that's very logical to me, to the extent that I have employed it in my personal code, something that I do and have done. But a lot of people object to it, and I can't say that I don't understand to an extent the nature of their objections. And their objections usually run something like this. Well, that takes the magic out of it. It takes the emotion out of it. It takes the mystery out of it. Sometimes they use the word romance. That's just too harsh for me. It's too businesslike for that type of relationship for me. And I think that, people tend to be more forgiving of one another once they have an emotional connection. So I don't know. I mean, if I do that, yes, of course, it will maximize the chances of sustaining a relationship if I happen to get into one, but my chances of even having a mate, if I start out that way, kind of dwindle to almost zero if I insist on asking those kinds of questions. To that, you say what?
To that, I would say that under the United Independent perspective, a person can choose not to do that if they're not comfortable with doing it. Both parties can meet each other at 5 o'clock in the afternoon And at 6 o'clock, say we know everything that we need to know. Let's go for it. They can do that. But once they do it, according to the logic, there shouldn't be any conflict as a result of questions asked afterwards. The whole idea is to minimize conflict. That's the whole idea for the entire concept. So if that will work for the parties, if they can agree, say, well, we're just not going to ask and answer these questions. That'll take the mystery out of it. That'll take the fun out of it. That'll take this out of it and that out of it. Okay. Then, once you're engaged, you should have no complaints ever about anything, because you have already concluded that there's no justification for complaints. And you've done that in advance. And that's keeping everybody honest. Because either party then can say, look, we agreed. We weren't going to ask these kind of questions. So therefore, I'm not providing any answers to any of these questions that you may ask after the fact. And you don't provide any for me. And we will keep the mystery going forever. And we will be very comfortable with these mysteries, or we will try to learn to be comfortable with them, because it's too late to start asking now.
Wow. Okay. Now, I think we had a conversation about this, some years ago, and I think the question was raised, but I've heard other people raise the question too, about perhaps the way to do this is to maximize the amount of time that you spend around a person of the opposite sex before you even get to the point where you contemplate having sexual intercourse with them. What a lot of people like to call platonic friendships. Sometimes even having a lot of dealings with the person while they're already sexually involved with someone else, and you're not sexually involved with that person. I think I recall having a conversation like that with you. Because you get to observe the person and see what it is they do and don't do, like and don't like, before there's a lot on the line with you. Because, even when you ask those questions, Mr. Fuller, there is the issue of, well, I'm asking this person this question. What are they? Are they telling me the truth? What do you suggest, other than what I just said in terms of spending time with the person in a non-sexual way for a period of time? What do you suggest in terms of maximizing the likelihood of getting truthful answers when you ask a prospective sexual partner the questions that you want to ask them?
Yes, that's the whole point. The questioning can start at any time. You can put off the questioning for 2 or 3 years if you want to, or for a couple of months, or for 2 days. You don't have to start asking the questions. You can have a long period of observation. But both parties should be comfortable enough. See, it's totally democratic. Totally democratic. Not autocratic at all. But both parties must be comfortable enough to ask and answer all of these questions. So it's almost a natural flow. You might say it is a natural flow, because if a person feels a little nervous about answering certain questions, then that means they're not ready anyway. That's a signal right there that they can continue just having conversations or having coffee or tea or whatever it is that they have. And with no sexual intercourse. They can interact with each other around an environment or whatever. But that's the major stipulation. In fact, that's the only one. They can go anywhere with each other, go on plane trips, whatever. But no sexual intercourse, no sexual play, until all parties are ready to ask and answer the questions prior to any acts of sexual intercourse and or serious sexual play. Now, if they're not comfortable in doing this, then simply don't start the questioning sessions. at all. That might not ever get around to it. But the criteria is, before there's sexual intercourse, questions have to be asked and answered by both parties. The only way that a person can skip over a question is that both parties agree that they're both going to skip that particular question. They're not going to answer that particular question or any other question that the people have a disagreement on. It's all voluntary, like the whole quote-unquote relationship. It's supposed to be voluntary anyway. It's not coercion. No pressure at all. None. Zero. If a person feels like there's pressure, that means that something is not working anyway. Both parties should be totally relaxed, one to the other.
Wow.
But the matter of the person's bringing up, well, taking the mystery out of it, taking the intrigue, taking the, well, some people might say the cat and mouse out of it. You can do that. Sometimes the game playing is very stimulating and adventuresome and etc. But most people who have gone that route and done it in a hurry, they had a few quick thrills, and then they had many months, sometimes years, of anguish and regrets, and sometimes serious conflict that results in violence. It didn't start out that way, but it could very easily end that way, so that there's no memory at all of how it started out.
Yeah.
And this compensatory way of questions and answers prior to, the theory is that everything will be very smooth, and over a long period of time, the theory is correct. In practice, very, 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 very satisfying, complete with all the thrills. That, in fact, that could be on the question list. How long do you think that you could feel the thrill with me? Do you think it's good for about 9 months or 2 years or 3 weeks? What do you think? You know me pretty well, I mean, up to this point. So what do you think right now? Do you think this will wear off based on some of your prior experiences and whatnot? And if so, how soon? And the two people can agree. I mean, they'll say, well, I would say within a ballpark guaranteed of at least 8 months. Beyond that, I think it's kind of up for grabs, because I usually get bored with a person after 8 months to 12. 8 to 16 months, I think, is max for me. And that's interesting and informative to know.
Right, and
then the person will ask the other person, well, what about you? Say, well, my experiences have been that, my last experience was 8 years, and then it was only terminated on account of the other party. Say, oh, well, my last experience was 4 weeks, and that was stretching it. Well, that's, you make a note of that. Then continue the questioning.
Right. Okay, and then the person might even say, well, I would say about 8 to 12 months, but I tell you what, it's just a thing, if you just will change the color of your hair or get a different haircut, or go on a trip for a bit. That helps. I think that could stretch it another 6 months to a year. You'd know. So you'd know at the end of 8 months to take a trip.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a person can say, well, would you think that you would enjoy a trip with me? A trip where? Well, a trip to the beach, or a trip to on a cruise and whatnot. And say, well, the person might say at that point, I don't know. I have to think about that. I've never been on a cruise, maybe. And that could be on the question list. See, no questions off limits. Have you ever been on a cruise with anyone? What happened after the cruise? What happened during the cruise? Was there a downer after the cruise? If so, how soon? What brought it on? Well, the answer might be, well, I was on the cruise and everything was wonderful as long as we were on the cruise. After the cruise was over, the person began to look different to me. They were all right when we were on that island. They had lots of things to do. And after the cruise was over, about 4 days after, they started getting boring. So that's a question, okay? So you make a note of that.
Right.
Boring 4 days after cruise.
Right.
As long as you can stay on the cruise, everything is fine. After the cruise, crash and burn after 4 days. Or at least it begins to ease off. And then eventually, after 3 weeks, it's gone altogether. The magic is gone. That's your last experience. Okay. How many experiences did you have like that? That's the question. Well, every one. Really, about 12. Okay, well, that's your record. Okay. 12 cruises. After 2 weeks after the cruise, 12 downers. Okay. So I can pretty well, on those averages, I can expect that in my case, too.
Now
it's just a matter, there's no limit to the questions. Everything that you possibly will ever want to know, it's got to be asked and answered up front. So
right now, here's what you said.
When you see that person coming towards your door, you look out the window, you say, now, that is a person that I am extremely comfortable with, more than I've ever been with anybody. And I like it. I'm not bored. And even when I'm bored, I'm not bored.
Wow.
Yeah. Because I know that person. I know. I'm not wondering. I'm not wondering where the person is coming from now. And even if I do wonder, it doesn't bother me to the extent that I'd want to trade that person in to anybody.
Let me revisit something I heard you say before, Mr. Fuller. I just want to see if I can get another take on it. I've heard you say, if I recall correctly, that when you think about becoming sexually active with a person, you've talked with them for a while, and then you say to yourself, okay, what is the worst possible thing that I can think of this person ever doing? And
yes.
then imagine that the person has done it. And usually for most people, it's some sort of infidelity, right? Catching the person in the act, right? And you say to yourself, okay, now when I open that door and see that, can I stand it? And
yes.
Can I stand it enough to stay with that person?
Yes.
Could you talk about that some more? I just
speak for itself.
Yeah, I know it does.
The scenario that you laid out right there, that tells you a lot about what you think about interacting with this person. When you answer, really, not so much the answer that you would get from the person, the answer you would get to yourself. Because there have been instances where people have laid out just that scenario, and they have said, well, you know what? it would be what it is. And what it is, that's what it is. But in making that assessment and picturing that in my mind, considering all things, that would still be the person that I would choose out of a crowd of 1,000.
I'm still left with one response to that, which is, wow. I mean, if we could all get to that point of truth, acceptance, there would be a lot of
the first person you have to tell the truth to is yourself.
Yeah. 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 If we could get to that point, telling the truth to yourself, and that is something that I think comes up in the ninth area as well. You talk about that a lot.
Not a new concept.
Right.
There's a song in the musical, goes way back. Morgan Best. He can come home as late as can be. Home without him ain't no home to me. Can't help loving that man of mine.
Wow.
Now, when both parties can say that, you got a little something unique going there.
No kidding. Now you say in your book on page 202, and I agree with it. You say avoid asking a person about his or her sexual activities unless you are willing to tell that person everything about your own. Avoid telling a person about your sexual activities unless that person is willing to tell you everything about his or her own before engaging in an act of sexual intercourse and or sexual play. And then you go on to say, ask yourself and answer this question for yourself truthfully. Would I want this person to know everything that there is to know about me at all times, in all places, in all things? And if not, why not? Now, the reason I quoted that is because it seems to me that if you really are going to get a person to answer what people would consider some very sensitive questions about them, their sexual history and so on, it's been my experience that people are less likely to share that if you haven't already shared something very sensitive about yourself. And so, I don't know how you can have both. I mean, you have to share something sensitive about yourself to really get a reasonable chance that the person's going to answer truthfully themselves. And yet you don't want to tell them anything unless they've assured you that they're going to tell you the same thing. It kind of seems like a catch-22, if that makes any sense. Can you help me with that?
Yes. If both persons are nervous about it in any way, or indicate, directly, indirectly, it simply means they're not ready. That's all it means. It's not an uptight situation at all. It just simply means is they're not ready. See, the key is if they agree, well, this thing is just getting too complicated. Let's just do away with it. We're not going through this. Let's just let it flow. When you let it flow, you shouldn't be saying later on, I didn't know and I don't like it. See, so it takes care of itself. See, we agreed, we would just let it all, free will. See where it goes on its own. Turn the steering wheel loose. It's too uptight. Let's just find our way, blindly.
Okay.
Or semi-blindly. At least, maybe not both eyes closed, but maybe one eye closed. One ear covered.
Right, and then at that point, there's no cause for yelling and screaming, and
none at all. The whole purpose for this is to minimize what has been disaster in relationships, and that is those three words. I didn't know. It comes up every time. I didn't know. I didn't know that would make you angry. I didn't know you gamble like that. I didn't know that, you're whimsical. I didn't know that you believe in, just not coming in. I mean, and just taking a trip somewhere and not telling anybody where you were or where you are. I didn't know that. I didn't know you were violent. I didn't know you were on the down low. I didn't know. I didn't know. I didn't know. I didn't know. I didn't know you used to go with my aunt.
Okay. I think there's some questions you wouldn't even know to ask, so I think that there's some value into an ongoing project of suggested questions. And by the way, to the listeners, at counterracism.com, under the area of sex, there is a pretty exhaustive list. I wouldn't say exhaustive, but it's a very long list. And it's a good place to get started. But, Mr. Fuller has already mentioned some questions that I know are not on that list. But it's a good start. Now, I do know that the whole purpose of, sex being the second most powerful motivating source in the known universe, I do know that the purpose of it, correct me if I'm incorrect, Mr. Fuller, is to minimize conflict between people who are not white, and specifically male-female. However, the purpose of minimizing conflict is to make it less easy for the white supremacists to use that conflict to not have to work that hard to practice white supremacy against us because we're doing it to ourselves. And so if we're talking about conflict, to me, sometimes my mind goes immediately to the ultimate conflict with it, which is war, counter-war. And the last time, like I said, that Mr. Fuller was here, he didn't really get a chance, I don't think, to explain what counter-war is, or what a lot of people call MECA, maximum emergency compensatory action. But before I ask about that, one thing that always struck me, and I couldn't find the exact page, but I found something close to it on page 48, Mr. Fuller, is that you said, that most people don't know the reason for their existence, but that in fact the basic goal that most people have is to survive, just to survive by any means necessary. That's their major thing to do. The second goal most sought, you say, is to dominate others through deceit and or violence, including the threat of violence. And the last thing that people say is, to establish peace. Now, this you say the page that I couldn't find is where you said that the mistake that people who are not white made, the mistake that people who choose to practice white supremacy is that they value being smart over being wise. I believe that's what you said. But I believe you said that the mistake that people who are not white made, the biggest mistake that they've made, is that they valued existence over justice. And I don't know what page you said that on, but is that a pretty good characterization of what you said on that matter?
Yes.
Okay.
It's not a new concept. Patrick Henry is supposed to have said something like that, liberty or death. You can also say justice or death. That you're willing to risk. Martin Luther King was willing to risk. Everything, including his existence. Malcolm X, Nelson Mandela, Winnie Mandela, Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman. The list is kind of long.
Well, it is.
They didn't know what was going to happen to them. The people really couldn't guarantee what was going to happen to them. Now, they took calculated risk, but it was risk nonetheless. There was a great chance of physical harm coming to all of these people, and some of it did.
Okay, now, it's my understanding it's my understanding that the codified method that you suggested, and this is, and it's it's the understanding upon which I'm operating when I try to codify my behavior, is that it's reverse engineering, meaning we want to eliminate white supremacy and replace it with a system of justice. And where we're trying to go is a place where at the end, right, everything is leading up to it. All of the suggestions are leading up to the attempt to get the white supremacists, the most powerful, smartest people in the known universe, to have to make a decision. And that decision is that they will either produce justice because they absolutely have the ability to do it. They simply do not have the will. So that we want to force them to make a decision to either produce justice or to kill all people who they have been making victims, to kill all people who are not white. And in order to get there, those people who are victims, those people who are not white on this planet, have to, en masse, have had enough. It seems to me that en masse they have to be that place where you just described Martin Luther King has been, which is that they value justice more than they value existence. Pretty big question. I don't know if it's answerable, but how do you get there to where all people who are not white are at a place where they value justice more than they value existence?
Oh, you get there by just a natural course of things. In other words, you resist, and then if you find resistance to your resistance, then you make up your mind how far you want to go. That's why it's called the United Independent concept. You don't look to see what somebody else is doing. Everybody has a different level of fear or a different level of desire. You always go according to the level of fear and or desire that you have at the time that you have it. That's what you listen to. That's that voice within you. That's that message being sent to you. Now, you're going a little too far right now. You're in danger. Or are you ready to go all the way at this particular point? Without asking anybody anything, just checking with yourself. Do you think that your circumstances are so horrible, or the way that you see the entire circumstance, that you want to push further at this particular time? If the answer is no in the mind of the person, you simply don't. And you don't have to explain it to anybody. That's the United Independent concept. Someone observing it might say, oh, well, you back down. You back down. Oh, I'm condemning you for backing down. They're not qualified to do that. No one is. If you choose to back down after making a bold step forward, and then you make 2 quick steps back, that's what you chose to do. And you're qualified to do that. Because different people have different levels of fear or desire at different times. And you act accordingly. When you see that it's the only thing to do is to keep going forward into harm's way, and that's your choice, then you do that. Don't check with anybody on that. You tell yourself the truth. Or even if you do check with someone, you tell yourself the truth. Because this is you. You can only account for one person. That's yourself. And as a victim of racism, no one is supposed to tell you what your limit is. You set your own limit. You listen to that voice. The voice might be telling you, now is not the time. In fact, there won't ever be a time. The voice might tell you that. because you can do things a different way, a better way, where the ultimate sacrifice will not be necessary for you. You're more valuable in other ways. That's a decision for the person to make. I'm talking about just in everyday things. In many cases, you make a bold step and then decide, well, it's a little too bold. You feel very uneasy with it. And so you might take 2, 3, 4 steps back after making one bold step forward out of fear, or simply out of a change of mind based on you perceive it is not the best strategy for you at that particular time and place. That's the united independent concept.
Right.
The person should act according to it.
Now, if you didn't think, I'll put myself in it. If I did not think that methodology at some point has a high likelihood of producing that place where virtually all people who aren't white are left with that choice, I don't think I would engage in this method of trying to codify my behavior. And it would seem to me that there are for me as I try to reason through it, that there are two basic obstacles to getting to that place. The first is on the negative side, where the white supremacists use just enough violence to scare on a certain number of people who aren't white who are trying to counter racism effectively, to scare the rest of the black people back into submission. The second obstacle is when the white supremacists use the carrot instead of the stick, which is to make things comfortable enough for enough people who aren't white to not feel like they really have enough to lose to where they're willing to risk the termination of their existence. I guess before I finish answering that question, I'm sort of meandering a little bit. Could you explain in your mind what, if any, is the difference between existence and life?
Oh, existence is when you exist because you're here. Life is when you're here in the correct conditions, meaning a world of justice. Everything that you interact with is just and correct. Things are the way that they should be. There's an absence of mistreatment of people. And the people who need help the most get the most constructive help at the time that is needed. Most people will say that's utopian. There's all kind of names for it. Shangri-La, heaven on earth, lots of cliches. But the basic belief, according to the United Independent Concept, following counter-racist logic and compensatory logic, is that it can be achieved. You can have that type of environment. It's just a matter of setting that as a goal, whether you reach it or not. Because the option is the status quo, which should be unacceptable to any reasonable person. Totally unacceptable. To be always full of anxiety and fear of the actions of other people. Not of the moon falling out of the sky, but of other people who have been on this planet for a very long time and should know better by now. There is a better way of doing things. other than always be surrounded by hostility and suspicion. The theory is, and the concept is, it can be relatively easily achieved with a serious commitment. It just seems difficult because no one has ever taken it seriously. The concept, that is.
Is it possible that no one has really, or not enough people have taken it seriously because they continue to value existence over justice?
No, mostly it's because of the system of racism, which is a system of royalism. And as long as you had that system of royalism, and then it morphed into a system of racism, which became the epitome of royalist thinking, imperialist thinking, you might say, in the empire thought, the holier-than-thou thought, that I'm entitled to mistreat people at my whim, and I don't have a duty to try to help the people who need help the most. As long as that type of thinking has been the dominant thinking among the people of the planet, in particular among the smartest people who have inhabited the planet, that's why we have all these problems. Because if the smartest people of this planet took another view, not just accumulate and grab everything from everybody and then dole it out as if they are imitating God, which is really what it is. That's what royalist thinking is. In the old days, according to history books, many of the people who were called Romans at that time and Greeks, they thought in terms of being deified. They worshiped what was then called pagan gods, and then sometimes they wanted to be anointed gods. Sometimes after they died, they wanted someone in the family to declare that they are now a god somewhere in the universe and governing the affairs of the people on the planet. That a person that once was here and a member of the royal family, when they pass on, they would be anointed by a person who is still here into goddom. Now that person has now become a god and is looking here at you in the spirit world and was appointed a god by his or her cousin, who is now in the imperial palace. That type of thinking was handed down through generations. Holier than thou. And it's been passed on to this very day. And the most powerful form of that type of authority is in the form of the system of white supremacy, sometimes called racism. That system needs to be changed.
So you think that the primary reason that this massive injustice and lack of correctness, which it keeps us from moving from existence into life, is that the system of racism and white supremacy keeps people from understanding that is the primary obstacle to justice and correctness? Or is it just that enough people understand that, but they just, nevertheless, just have other priorities?
People don't understand it.
Okay.
People always act according to their understanding. Now, that understanding is different from knowledge. People can know certain things, but they don't understand all of the intricacies that make the things what they are and relate them to where your understanding comes from is when you understand how it relates to everything around you, including your own motivations. Once a person begins to understand that, they will act on their understanding. It's very difficult for a person to act against what they understand. They can know something without understanding what it is that they know. They just know that it's a fact, but it's an abstract fact. They don't see where the understanding comes when they relate it to everything, every move that they make, and every move that everybody around them makes. Then you're overwhelmed by this understanding, and you have to react to it.
I see. Okay, I see. I see it in a way I haven't seen it before. I see. Okay, and so I know one of the things that you said in your book is that we generally, as a group of people, black people don't understand that existence without justice is valueless. Is that what you're talking about, Mr. Fuller?
Yes, that's why we chase valueless things, because we put value on things that we're told to put value on. And it brings about a lot of misery. And we just keep making a great big effort to become more and more miserable without understanding that that's what we're doing. We think that we're finding happiness when we're going just in the opposite direction. Running here, running there, doing this, doing that, just got to go. Got to do it. Why? Because somebody said so. Somebody like who? Well, society. Well, who's society? I don't know. Somebody out there. But somebody out there is telling you what to do, what to motivate you, what to think is important and what not to think is important. Yeah, well, that's how it is. So have you ever thought that you need to figure out and understand why that is what it is and how you fit into it? Well, that takes too much thinking. So you do what? Well, I just do stuff. Well, are you happy with the stuff you're doing? Well, sometimes. Where do you think it's all going to lead to? Well, something. And to a great extent, it's the average person, particularly people who are in dire need.
Now, what I was hoping you could comment on, it's just something that I hope I'm doing more than just venting. But what I notice when I look around, I live in an area of Southern California that has it's probably about 40 to 50% very dark-skinned people, and then the balance is people who call themselves Hispanic, Latino, Filipino, things like that. A few Arabs, people who call themselves Arabs. And what I notice is that they seem to always be engaged in something so much more constructive, particularly the males, than the darker males. And it doesn't seem to me that the darker males, who are very commonly called black people, don't want to be more constructive. But something has got to be going on whereby, it seems to me logically, whereby they're being denied the opportunity to learn how to do anything constructive. When I see people working on the sewers or the electrical lines on my street or anywhere around me, those generally tend to be white people. Don't see them any other time, Mr. Fuller, except when it's time to do some serious work. And nobody ever asks them why they're there, and they're never there any other time, and nobody ever asks them what they're doing. But, I mean, even when it comes time to repair a car of some sort, all the auto repair shops around here are operated by people who call themselves Latino or Hispanic, and all the people who call themselves black take their automobiles there to get fixed, but nobody there works there unless they're not darker skinned. What is going on that's making people who call themselves black, but particularly black males, so ignorant that they can't seem to do anything constructive?
Well, in looking around, people act to a great extent according to what they're used to. So one way to find out what people will do is to find out what they want. People usually act according to the things that they want. And black males in this area of the world traditionally have wanted very little. I will point to, when I say very little, I mean within the giant scheme of things. They're not very idealistic at all. They're very fundamental in their wants, according to tradition, their experiences, the traditions of the people who came just a little before them. What is it to value? What is it not to value? So, it kind of goes back to another song in the musical Porgy and Bess. I got plenty of nothing, and nothing is plenty for me. Got my gal, got my song, got nothing the whole day long. Now, it's not exactly in that frame of mind that the average black male in the Northwestern Hemisphere exists today. They want a lot of things, but they don't want hardly any effort to get them in a constructive manner, and many of the things that they want are not of constructive value except for showing off. Showing off to whom? Other black people. This is the primary reason for existence, to do things, to show off. And I want to underline this. When you say people's wants, they want to do just enough to show off, capital letters, flashing lights. The term, show off. Do just enough to show off to other black people. And many black people throughout the world have this type of mentality. Shut off everything else out of their minds, except what can I do to make some type of emotional impression on other black people. If you think about just what I just said and look around you, you'll see this is the maximum ambition. Not think outside the box. Think about the world as a whole, and think about what a person's mission, regardless of who the person is, should be on this planet. Most black people in the Northwestern Hemisphere, truth be told, and particularly black males, they want to get in just enough position, quote unquote, acquire just enough things, or acquire just enough knowledge, or acquire just enough ability to show off. Those two words are one word hyphenated. Show off, quote unquote, to other black people. And to them, that's the whole reason for existence. Nothing other than that. Anything outside of that is some type of strange new galaxy they should stay away from and not be a part of or wonder about. Just do just enough to show off.
Mr. Fuller, are you saying that that black males are not interested in impressing females females in general, but all females by what they have and what they can do. They're only interested in showing off to other black people, male and female. They're not interested in elevating themselves to maximize their chance for sexual intercourse.
That's one of the show-off-isms. Page 41 of the textbook.
True, it is there.
It says, number 4, show off to each other their ability to make sexual impressions on each other. This is among the victims of racism. The first one is show off to each other the things that white people have allowed them to obtain. Look at what I got. Look at what I bought. Look at my new this. Look at my new that. Come down here and let me show you what I got. That I got from where? From the people who allowed them to have it, either directly or indirectly. Number 2, show off to each other the information that white people have allowed them to obtain. Oh, I know this. I know that. I know the other. What do you know? You don't know anything. How often does a black male say that to another black male? Man, you don't know nothing. I know something. I know things you don't know. Where'd you learn it, mister? Oh, I learned it all right. I've been around. In the old days, in this area of the world, you used to hear black people down on country roads bragging about where they've been. Like where they have been has something to do with who they are. Where have you been? You ain't been nowhere. You've been right here in this little old town all your life. I've been to New York City. Yeah, I've been to big time. You ain't been nowhere. I was in the war. I went to Paris. Where you been? Fast forward that. Fundamentally, it hasn't changed today. Showing off.
It's the context of white supremacy that makes all the difference. Because I have a quote by Aristotle Onassis, and he's quoted as having said, quote, if women didn't exist, all the money in the world would have no meaning. So I'm like, part of me is wondering, how does that make black men any different than any other man, other than just their smaller ambitions? And I'm still having trouble understanding why we have such smaller, and I know maybe I'm being silly now, Mr.
Well, it's not just a small ambition, it's the correct ambitions. The correct ambitions we're put here on this planet to produce a product called justice in the face of non-justice. Now, the white supremacists, their ambition is to mistreat people. And in the process of doing that, gather up everything in sight and put it under their domain in order to have dominion over all of the non-white people on the planet. Now, that includes females, all females. But what happens is, with that type of ambition, they begin to do all sorts of things that do not make sense because that ambition does not make sense within the greater scheme of things. It's not logical just to try to dominate people and mistreat people and not help the people who need help the most in order to say that you are God on earth, because that's what white supremacy is all about. That's the whole concept. And in the process of thinking like that, you put under dominion, if you're a male, a white male, all of the females on the planet. Now, and for what purpose? Well, to mistreat them and to not help them in the way that they need help the most. And then what you do is just to come up with the idea of promoting the behavior of just doing things just to be doing them, since you don't have any other reason for doing anything other than domination. Domination. Domination for the sake of mistreatment. So they wind up mistreating what they're dominating, since that's the purpose. And they don't know what to do other than that. So it's just constant mistreatment and misuse of people and things and creatures. And just on and on and on ad infinitum. And when you set that as an agenda, then you become corrupt within yourself, because your ideas and your view of existence on the planet is corrupt. Then you begin to do all sorts of corrupt things. Slaughter people for fun. And just playing endless games with females and teaching everybody else to do so. And teaching the females to play endless games. And nobody's sincere about anything except being treacherous. Everybody being treacherous at all times. And this is the result. And then when you get so bored with that, then you begin to tinker with the gender of people. Telling the females that they should be males. And telling the males that they should be females. And then trying that out for size. And see how far you can go with that. Next thing you know, it'll be what some of the ancients tried when they got these royalist ideas. They start experimenting with animals. Trying to come up with a person who's half horse and half person. They made statues of these type of things, showing that these were ambitions. Why would you want to make a person, take a person and make it into half of a horse? Well, make it run faster. Well, you can run fast with 2 legs, not as fast as you can with 4, but then there are things that don't work out too well if you have a person who's half person and half horse. To create a made people. This is a pretty excellent design when you have a male, a masculine male, all masculine, 2 arms, 2 legs, the phallus, a totally male person. And standing next to that person is a totally effeminate person. Mammaries, breast. Yes, breast. Not a flat chest, but breast. And a vagina. Phallus and vagina. 2 arms, 2 legs, hands at the end of the arms, feet at the end of the legs, a head with a brain, heart. Pretty excellent creation. Well crafted, well thought out. But along comes people who want to be gods on earth and want to say, well, I can make better something than creation ever did, even though people never created anything. They only arrange what has already been created. And then, out of boredom and arrogance, start tampering with what has already been created and fashioning everything into something else. Now, you can do this for some things like iron and steel and whatnot, and the proper use of magnesium or tin or rocks. But when you want to experiment with everything out of arrogance and switch the roles of everything, then what you are creating is chaos. But then if you are a person who thinks that you're a God, you say, well, I can create chaos. I can do it, and I can get away with it, and I can profit from it. Because now there's nothing else for me to do since I dominate everything and everybody, and out of boredom, I just start doing stuff. Because that's what a lot of the emperors did in ancient Rome. They just started doing stuff. So they built huge coliseums and started feeding people to the lions because they were bored. That's when you get off track as to what your real mission should be. Guaranteeing that no one is mistreated and helping people, helping the person who needs the most constructive help. And there's always plenty of that to do so that you don't get bored. And you actually, if you do enough of it, I believe, the world will be the type of place that it ought to be, and people will not get bored with it because there will always be something else to do, another problem to solve. And so you solve it in the most constructive manner, rather than just getting enough power, like the white supremacists have, to go kicking the people around so you can feel good about yourself for having done so, because that's all that it is.
I wanted to ask you about, because we talked, I heard you talk about how the domination of all females under the thumb of the white supremacist male, racist man takes place, how it just falls into the category of them dominating everyone and everything. I'm wondering if you think that if at all, the motivation for white females having sexual activity with all the males on the planet that they can that are not white, is that different in some way? What is the motivation for racist woman having sex with a black male? Not in terms of why she's being put up to do it by white males, but why is she doing it, do you think?
Well, if you just study the history of the Roman Empire, you just do it because you can. And it's another form of domination because the two people are not equal. The non-white male is not equal. The white people, okay, male and female. So therefore, that's a choice by the white female. Now, the non-white male may have the desire, but he doesn't make the choice. The choice has to be okayed by the white supremacists. So it's actually the white woman, racist woman, who says, she comes to the jail cell, you might say, or to the catacombs, and she picks out the Negro stud and says, I'll take that one. Come to my parlor and spend a few nights with me. And when you have that kind of power, he'll go. Sometimes he'll go reluctantly. But if he's been raised under the system of white supremacy, many times he does not go reluctantly. He goes with great enthusiasm because he has been chosen by the lady of the house, the queen. So he goes. And it's the same with the black female. And chosen by the man of the house. Who, me? He's choosing me. So she goes. After all, smartest person, most powerful person, and he has chosen her. If only briefly, or sometimes for a very long time. Story of Sally Hemings. Lots of material benefits to go to the big house. Better than the drudgery out there in the field. Now, there's some shame connected with it, but enough rest, being able to sleep a full night without a body aching with pain from hard work, from working like a mule in the field, and only having to please the sexual fantasies of the master. Sometimes not in a great way, just when he's has a mood or in a whim. From a physical and material viewpoint, the use of time and energy, one could see how a person would say, well, that's a better deal than a lot of other deals that you get on this world plantation. So it's understandable. Even though it's child abuse on the part of the white person who does this during the existence of the system of white supremacy.
Mr. Fuller, are you up to taking some questions from some callers?
Yes, I can.
Okay. See here. 310, your mic is open if you would like to ask a question. Actually, no one has their hand up. At this point, we are going to start taking questions if you would like to ask Mr. Fuller a question. Hello.
Hi, this is 310, Mr. JJ 310. Can you hear me all right?
Can hear you just fine, sir.
Wonderful.
Go right ahead.
I have a question. I was wondering if I could ask you both a question, because I am interested in both of your perspectives. So the question is, the question is, do you think that there are biological or genetic reasons that differ in producing white racism versus black racism?
I didn't get the question. The question is, do I think that there is a biological difference or genetic difference?
Yes. In terms of white racism, in terms of white racism, right? I'm tongue-tied today. In terms of white racism versus black or, other groups, non-white racism.
Well, non-white people under the system of white supremacy cannot be categorized as racists or as members of a race. According to compensatory counter-racist logic, there's just one race, and that's the white race. No human race. What would a human be racing against?
Okay, well, let me
humane person is not racing against anything, So now that just leaves one race of people. See, the white supremacists told the non-white people that they were members of a race, and they still do the telling. Now, a lot of people haven't noticed that. They determine what race anybody is, which goes to show you the power of white supremacy. So
let me correct my question then.
Yes, there could be a biological difference. There could be, since no one has explained why. I mean, there are theorists, but it hasn't been proven, at least to the general population of the planet, why white people became white supremacists and what was the motivation. That is usually not even discussed, except just among a very few people, a few victims of racism. But white people in general do not discuss why they do what they do when it comes to having established a system worldwide of white supremacy, what has come to be known as white supremacy and our racism. And the non-white people were blindsided by it because apparently, I don't know for sure, no one ever thought of it before except somebody white. No one ever thought of the idea of running all the world's business on the basis of what color somebody is. I understand there was once a measurement in ancient history about everything was, when it came to measurements, you measured everything by the king's foot. That's how the word foot came into being. But that's just when it came to measurements. But when someone thought of an idea of categorizing people by color and then treating people a certain way with hostility and domination on the basis of the color of the skin of a person, that was a real monumental idea. I don't know exactly when it was conceived. People have been arguing about it or discussing it for years. Some people say 400 years. Some people say 600 years. Some people say 2,000 years. And then there are other scholars who say 6,000 years. That the idea was conceived 6,000 years ago. And that we've been stuck with it ever since. But it's turned out to be the most dynamic, most powerful political and religious force that the world has ever seen. And the most persistent problem, because that's what it is, a problem.
Did that answer your question, or did you have a follow-up?
No, I think that definitely answered my question. Well, let me make sure I understood it. Essentially, your answer was that you were unsure of whether or not there is a biological or genetic reasons.
Yes, because I haven't done enough research on it. I mean, like I said, and most people who venture to discuss it, very few people venture to discuss it. I haven't ventured to look into it in depth because it takes a lot of looking into. But for the people who have looked into it, most people who listen to what is being said just walk away in silence. There has to be an explanation of what motivates white people more than any other people to have a tendency to want to run the entire world based on, not all white people now, but enough smart and powerful white people, enough smart white people who want to dominate and mistreat people who are called off color, based on color, based on nothing but that. Nothing but that. No other criteria. Just look at the person's color and say, you are eligible for mistreatment. Mistreatment by whom? By me. Based on what? Because I'm white and you're not. That's a very simple idea, but it is very powerful because it has been made powerful by enough white people who said, I'll sign on for that idea. And I will hold to it. When I turn loose to everything else, I'll hold on to that idea for dear life. Now, what motivates a person to think like that and act like that? There are theories out here, but there's no unanimous conclusion that everybody agrees on, or, for that matter, will even discuss at great length, in fine detail, in huge numbers.
Thank you.
We want to, since Mr. Fuller is the guest, I would prefer to see if anyone else has questions that they would like to ask, and then if time permits, I'll take a stab at your question. But I did invite Mr. Fuller on as the featured guest, so let me see if anyone else has a question.
Fair enough. I will listen.
Okay. We have a full switchboard, but no one seems to have a hand up. I'm not sure if these people want to ask a question. Okay, I do see a hand up now on a 111. So I'm going to open up 111's mic. Okay. 111, your mic is open. Do you have a question for Mr. Fuller?
Yes, I do. Are you addressing me?
Yes, I am.
Oh, wonderful. Wow, that was fast. I didn't know I was going to get through so soon. Yes, I would like to say hello to your guest and as well as you, Cree. I love your show.
Thank you.
And I wanted to kind of ask Mr. Fuller, to know, I listen to a lot of the European shows like Coast to Coast and Art Bell, and they do feel that they are connected with aliens and higher superior beings off planet, and, you know, some of them will go so far as to admit that they were genetically engineered by beings not, you know, from this planet. So I wanted to know what Mr. Fuller thought about that, because it seems like to me that the intelligence that they operate from is not necessarily coming from them themselves, but maybe it is an intelligence that's not necessarily of this planet, that's probably giving them the information on how to colonize maybe older root races, and maybe that's how they, you know, they're into Satanism. You know, a lot of times we're taught that that's evil and bad, and Ouija boards and a lot of stuff that we have been indoctrinated into thinking that it's really bad, but at one time this is, you know, what people practiced, and it wasn't considered evil. So I'm going to hang up and see what Mr. Fuller says about that, that maybe they're getting their information from some off-planet beings who may not be very friendly to mankind or humankind or any kind at all, but they're using these Europeans or Caucasians as a mean of control, and that they're giving them information on how to colonize the only race of people who could possibly stop them from their world domination because they want access to the earth. Thank you. I'll hang up and listen offline. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Mr. Fuller.
Well, that ties right in with what I said before. I don't know. So since no one has really proven that they do know, some people, not many, but a few people have advanced some theories, but it's usually not discussed. So what the lady just said could be. I can simply say, I don't know. Under the compensatory counter-racist logic process, it is my duty to say that I don't know if I don't know. And I do not know, but that could be. That's a theory. And could be discussed by someone who is willing to look farther into it and probably come up with irrefutable proof that that is so, or that it isn't so, and that there's some other reason. But I simply say I don't know. What I mostly deal with is what the victims can do about it. I mean, in a mechanical way. And because there are certain things that victims can do, I think, to bring the system of white supremacy to an end and replace it with a better system. Presumably that system would be the system of justice. Not another system of mistreatment, but a system of justice, a system that would ban mistreatment. Because that is the main reason, or really the basic reason, the only logical reason for getting rid of the system of white supremacy. Because it's designed to throw away millions of people, sometimes before they're even born, many times before they're born. And a system like that is evil, E-V-I-L, flat out. You don't have to be sheepish about saying that. That's an evil system that's designed deliberately to throw away millions of people on a routine basis, set people one against the other, and sit back and enjoy the show. People hacking each other to death in Rwanda, in Burundi, places like the Congo, total instability of other places where people are just running around just doing things and having no direction or in living or existing in poverty all of the time, like the dark-skinned people of Brazil, et cetera, dark-skinned people all over the world in constant ignorance, always looking up to the sky for someone, not from another planet, but from someone in what we call an airplane or a helicopter, to throw down a few packages of food when they're in dire need of an overall overhaul of the place where they exist and where they are contained, not allowed to leave, not allowed to better themselves by migrating from one place to another like the white supremacists do. The white supremacists go where they please. The victims of white supremacy go where they are sent. Sent by whom? By the white supremacists. The system of white supremacy is an evil system. Should be replaced with a system of justice. That's what this wonderful planet is entitled to.
Absolutely. And I want to give out a couple of phone numbers. One, I want you to give out, Mr. Fuller, is the way to get your book, The United Independent Compensatory Code System Concept. Could you tell the listeners how to get a hold of a copy of your book?
They could just call me directly, or if they're in California, they can get copies at SO1 Bookstore if they're around the Los Angeles area. SO1 Bookstore, I think they carry it, and that's on Degnan Boulevard in Los Angeles. I don't know in Northern California. I'm not sure that Marcus bookstores are still functioning, but if they are, you might be able to get copies there. I know of no other places in the California area. Now, for those who would like to get it directly from me, they can call 202-484-5461. That's 202-484-5461.
Yeah, I would like to encourage the listeners, if you are going to order the book, and I highly suggest that you do order it directly from the author, Mr. Fuller. I hope that there will be others who find it to be a life-changing event to actually read through the book. So, yeah, I would encourage you to call Mr. Fuller. For those of you who want to call the show, the call-in number, if you happen to be listening remotely or from another site, is 347-633-9734. Again, 347-633-9734. I have like I said, a full switchboard. I have opened up the mic for 402 if 402 has a question for Mr. Fuller. I'll wait a second or two, and if not, I have a question for Mr. Fuller.
Hello, Mr. Fuller, and hello to Cree. How are you? I do have a question because I was listening to another show on Blog Talk Radio, and the discussion came up of racism. However, I think there's always this misunderstanding in the understanding what the definition is. This person sent me an email stating racial discrimination or discrimination. Now, under your definition, Mr. Fuller, that I believe is the most accurate, how does the word discrimination fit into the definition for racism, white supremacy? I mean, how do they work as together in the full explanation on this system?
I don't use the word racial discrimination because it's confusing. I never use that term because there's just one form of racism. The term racial discrimination becomes too confusing. It's too fluid. It lends itself to confusion. And the races feed off of confusion. So there are many terms that I don't use. Diversity, affirmative action, racial discrimination, racial segregation, racial integration, all of these terms. I use the term racism is white supremacy, and white supremacy is racism. And there's only one race, and that's the white race. And the white race practices racism, which is white supremacy. Now, it doesn't say that all white people belong to the white race. You have to join a race, meaning you have to make a decision about I will mistreat people based on their color. People who have color, I will mistreat for my convenience. And I will not help them in a way that they need help the most in any of the areas of activity, except maybe when I choose to, and that makes me supreme, since I have domination over them. And there are 9 areas of activity. They'll just choose either one or all of them, depending on the whim of the individual white supremacists. Economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war. And the system of white supremacy is set up so that it dominates all non-white people in all of those areas of activity. So there's no such thing as racial discrimination within that context. You either have racism or you don't. And what you have is a worldwide system that covers all of those 9 areas of activity every minute of every day and dominates every non-white person wherever he or she may be on this planet, or if the person is within the orbit of this planet or under the jurisdiction of this planet. Because that's what white supremacy means. In charge for domination, mistreatment, and withholding need, and doling it out. Doling out the needs of people in such manner that the people have to be dependent upon you. You don't allow them to become so-called independent. There's no such thing as an independent non-white person anywhere on this planet. They're all, every last one, including myself, every day, every minute of every day, dependent on the whims and the decisions by somebody white who is also a white supremacist. It's absolute.
Did that answer your question, or did you have a follow-up?
That answered my question for that particular question. However, I know that time is short. I will not take up any more of your time. But if time permits, I do have another question later. So thank you for answering that, Mr. Fuller. I appreciate it.
Well, I hope I answered it sufficiently.
Very good. If you do have time, I will come back to you, 402. Okay, now I'm going to go down the list. You're welcome. I'll apologize to the listeners that I always use a phone that has somewhat of a delay, and it appears that either I'm being inattentive or that I'm cross-talking. It's not my intent. It's simply that there's a delay in my cell phone service, so if people can understand that, I'd appreciate it. Okay, so I'm going to go down the list of the people on the switchboard who do not have their hands raised. I don't know if it's a technical issue or if these people truly do not, or are just listening and they do not have a question for Mr. Fuller. But I will go through them one by one to give them an opportunity in case they do have a question. There is someone on a Skype line whose handle ends in a 201, first name beginning with a K. I am opening your mic, and your mic is now open. If you are that person, go ahead, please, if you have a question. Okay.
I don't have a question.
I will assume that. Oh, okay. Thank you for at least acknowledging that. Okay, also 253. Your mic is not, yes, your mic is now open. 253, if you have a question, go ahead, please.
Just listening.
Okay, 253 is just listening. And then we have 972. Do you have a question?
No, I'm just,
I will
I guess I have a question. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can hear you, sir.
How you doing? First of all, I'd like to thank you for your show and thank Mr. Fuller for coming on your show, sharing his time with us. I guess my question would be in relation to the war and counter-war portion of your book. You state that if someone takes another person's life, then the best thing for them to do is to take their life. In the event that we were to ever be encountered with physical violence from racist, white supremacists, at that time, I'm not certain if your book addresses it. I think it does, but I can't recall at this moment. At that time, do you still suggest that that is the action that follows, or would that not apply if we were to have to react in counter violence towards the violence that is brought towards us? And I'll mute my phone and listen.
Well, if I understand the question, yes, it's still valid. In fact, that's the only recommendation in the book other than direct self-defense. If a person takes the initiative to kill another person, in other words, willfully and deliberately seek out another person and kill that person, for whatever reason, the person should be willing and should indeed kill him or herself immediately after having done so, or in the process of doing so. We're trying, or should be trying, to establish a world dominated by justice and the concept of justice. Killing a person and then, like the white supremacists do, brag about it, should never be done. And killing a person and then seeking to apologize for having done so, after having done so, should never be done. For one thing, the person that you kill is not there to receive the apology. To apologize to other people is not logical. If you're going to offer an apology, you have to offer it to the person that you killed. That's the logic. And the only way you can do that is to enter into the realm of where the person is, where you sent that person by killing the person. Wherever that person went, you should go. That is the concept of justice. No one else should do the killing of you. That is perpetuating the idea that someone has the right to do this, some separate entity. No hired killer should kill the person who did the killing. That's absurd and obscene and incorrect. You kill someone willfully, deliberately, then you should show your honesty, your integrity when it comes to killing, and your sincerity by killing yourself. That's a must. That's the kind of world we want, or should want, because it makes total sense. Stop this business of glorifying war. Because a lot of people think that war is something to be glorified. Violence is something to be glorified, something to cheer about in the way of the ancient Romans. Go to the Colosseum and see people fight the lions or fight each other, chop each other to death with swords, use battle axes to hack each other to death for entertainment. And that's what it has become. The books, shelves of many a bookstore is loaded down with books that worship death making, the making of death. It's glorified. Many of them are called thrillers or murder mysteries. Bite millions. Huge amounts of all types of materials and money is spent glorifying, death making, not trying to invigorate and go from existence into life. The lives of people, bringing the people on this planet to life, going from existence into life, and glorify that as a duty. But instead, glorifying death making. So under maximum emergency compensatory action, you want to send a message. If I killed you, I'll show you that I really need to see you dead, and that everybody needs to see you dead because you should be dead. And that I not be around to gloat about it or to profit from it, because that's not what your motive should be. It's to say, because you are a killer and I have to kill you, I will go myself with you into non-existence, because I want to send a message that nobody should do the types of things, and nobody should be forced to do the types of things that lead to the killing of one person by another. Ever. Not ever.
Okay.
I hope that answers the question of what that means and why that is necessary. We want to send that message, or we should want to send that message, that we have a world where the killing of one person by another is something that is archaic and ancient and completely unheard of, and that people now or in the near future should be walking around saying that they heard that 1,000 years ago one person killed another person deliberately, and nobody will believe it. People will say, oh, that's absurd. Who would do that? Who would ever think of doing something like that? That's crazy. Where did you get that story? That's the way people should be talking now. Well, I heard that it happened, but it happened maybe about 5,000 years ago. You mean to tell me that one person killed another person as recently as 5,000 years ago? Yep, that's what I heard. That's the way people should be talking now. And everybody looks at everybody and says, see, he's always making up stories like that. Nobody would do anything like that. That's crazy. What kind of sense does that make? A person killing a person? For what? You know, where'd you get that? That's a weird idea. That's the way people should be talking right this minute. But you can't walk out your door without getting shot at. Somebody's trying to kill you.
Wow. Okay, we have a question with a hand up. 860, your mic is open.
Thank you. Hello, Cree, and hello, Mr. Fuller.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
I have, three questions. They'll be quick, and I'll get out the way so that you can respond to them. I wrote them in the chat room, but I guess nobody's really keying on that. One of them is, Mr. Fuller, do you agree with Dr. Welsing that the reason for racism, white supremacy is for white people to stave off genetic annihilation? The other one is, the next one is, in the event of, let's say racism, white supremacy is replaced with justice, do the white supremacists then have to pay for their transgressions? And the third and final question is, do you think that the so-called suicide bombers in the so-called Middle East and elsewhere are righteous in their actions? And I'll get out the way and listen to what you say.
Okay, I'll try to remember the questions. Sometimes I can't remember the questions. But Dr. Welson's theory, do I agree with it? It's not for me to agree with it. I disagree with it because it's a theory. But it should be thought about, since no one that I know of has offered a logical reason why the system of white supremacy exists, other than Dr. Welson, who has offered a theory. She calls it the Crest theory of why they behave the way that they do. I haven't heard anyone mount an argument to the contrary. And I haven't attempted one because I wouldn't. I simply wouldn't attempt to argue against it because I'm not qualified to argue against it. I simply say I don't know, but I do say that it's credible in lieu of no one offering another explanation. No one offering another credible explanation, and most people not even offering an explanation. They just say it is what it is, or words to that effect. That's inadequate. There's a scientific reason for everything. It's just a matter of exploring and finding out what it is. Now, the so-called Middle East, if I remember.
Yes, do you think that the
suicide
bombers, right.
Yes.
Do you think that, I'm sorry.
Yes. Now, that's a religious matter, from what I basically understand. So it's not the same as what I advocate, because in my book, Maximum Emergency Compensatory Justice, or Maximum Emergency Compensatory Action, which is a better term, comes under the United Independent Clause, meaning that a person is doing what he or she is doing to end the system of white supremacy and replace it with the system of justice. That's compartmentalized. Now, the tactic may be similar, but the objective is altogether different. So I couldn't comment on what people do in behalf of their religion, other than I always say that people should practice whatever their religion is under freedom of religion. Except I take exceptions to one, and this is a violation of that particular clause or that particular duty, some would say. But I say I don't have the duty to support the religion of white supremacy. White supremacy is the strongest religion on earth, and I say I don't support that religion in intent. I support it in practice because I'm subject to it. But I should do everything I can to eliminate that religion. Why? Because it's a religion that is designed to ignore and or destroy all other religious intents. Because the religion of white supremacy is a religion that's designed to mistreat people. It's designed to mistreat people. The intention of the religion is to mistreat people. And I will speak against that particular religion. Now,
okay.
I hope that answers that question.
Yes, sir, it does.
Does that answer that question?
Yes, it does. The third one was, do the white supremacists, in the event that justice is the system that takes over, do the white supremacists now pay for their transgressions, for the things that they've done?
Yes, they pay for them by doing what the objective should have been in the first place of all of the people, according to counter-racist logic, the objective of all of the people on this planet is to solve problems and not make a problem, like the system of white supremacy. So the way that they would, quote, unquote, pay for that in the way of compensation is what? To do just the opposite, practice justice. And it is my duty and the duty of everybody else on the planet, according to counter-racist logic, to press them, to push them into having to make the decision to either do justice or kill all of the non-white people on this planet while they still have the muscle to do it. But that should be the objective of every non-white person and every correctly intended white person on the planet who is aware of the existence of racism. The racists are the most powerful people on the planet. So therefore, if you're forcing them to give up racism, they have two ways to go. Either kill all of the non-white people on the planet or do justice. That's if it's, these are the major choices. I don't know of any third choice. And everybody on the planet is supposed to be in the process of forcing them to have to make that decision and make it as soon as possible, and see which way they'll go, and be willing to go whichever way they want to go with it. If they choose, well, rather than give up racism, I'll kill all the non-white people on the planet. And the non-white people of this planet should say, do it. You said you're going to do it, because we don't believe it. Prove it. Prove that that's what you'll do. Now, the concept is they'll either do it or they won't. But either way, the system of white supremacists will be out of business, and we shouldn't worry about whatever decision they make. Because whatever put us here will keep us here, and if it doesn't keep us here, we didn't have any business here in the first place. Or we at least don't have any business here now, at the time that they kill us all. That's the theory, and it makes sense.
Okay, sir. Well, thank you for answering the question. And if I may say, Gus T. Renegade, I know you out there. I listen to your show, but I'm at work when you're on. But shout out. But thank you.
Thank you for calling in.
Thank you for your question, sir. 253, I don't see your hand up, but your mic is open if you have a question for Mr. Fuller.
I just have this one, just about another 5 minutes.
Okay, sir. Mr. Fuller, do you have time for one more question?
Oh, yes.
Okay. 253, if you have a question, your mic is open.
No, ma'am. Very constructive show. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, then here's my question, Mr. Fuller. There are people whose classification, whose race classification, meaning that they seem to be eligible to practice the race, to be white, in certain parts of the world today. That they are not eligible to practice racism, meaning that they cannot be classified as white in other parts of the world. For instance, in Russia, I've spoken even with some white people. I've showed them some footage of people who are not considered white in Russia and asked them if I've spoken to white people in this part of the world, are these white people? And I've been told that, yeah, these are white people here, but they are not considered white people in Russia. Given the way that I understand you understand white people to be people who identify themselves as white, who classify themselves as white, who are accepted as white by other people, and generally function as white, would you say that these people are white, given that it seems to depend right now, today, if they were to fly from Russia to here, they'd be white, and then go back to Russia and not be white? Would you classify those people? Would you say, not you classified, because white people do the classifying, would you say that these people are white people?
I would have to ask the people. I would have to talk to the people. See, and they would determine what they are, and if the other white people go along with it, then I would have to accept that as probable cause to believe that the people are, for all practice, white people. Because it is the white supremacists who determine who is white and who is not. There are millions of non-white people who call themselves black, and who white people say, yes, you're black, even though you look like you're white. But yes, you are black. You call yourself black, and I recognize you as being black and will treat you as being black. Mm-hmm. And so then, for all practical purposes, that person is black. Many black people we call black right here in this area of the world, have many of these people in what we call our families and whatnot. People who could so-called pass for white. But they are classified as black. They accept the classification as black. They function as black. And the white supremacists, which is the real criteria, say that they are black. And so for all practical purposes, they are black. So in direct answer to the question, you have to talk to the actual people and then see how the other white people interact with them. Now, these white people may decide that these people who are considered to be non-white, even though they look like they're white, if they'll say, no, I'm not white, and I'm saying I'm not white. And I'm not going to function as a white person. I function as a black person. Then it's up to the black people to be maybe suspicious of whether or not this is a trick, but to just observe. And if they function as black people, then for all practical purposes, and when I say in a constructive manner, it has to be constructive, because if they behave in a manner that's not constructive, then there's all kinds of probable cause to believe that is deception on the part of the white supremacists, and that they have sent some white supremacists among black people, and these white supremacists are now acting like they are now black people, but it's an act. So there's probable cause for suspicion, but the suspicion will prove itself one way or another by whether what they do is constructive. Now, when it stops being constructive, then you will certainly, even if they start out being constructive, if at any point they stop being constructive, then you can just simply say, yes, most likely these are white supremacists. Since according to the code, you never really identify anyone as a white supremacist.
Understood.
Never say that, unless the person him or herself says that he or she is a white supremacist. You never say that, but you always say, if you're white, if you're classified as white, and you generally function as white, then there's cause for suspicion. That's all. Suspicion of what? That you could be a white supremacist.
I did have just a quick follow-up question, but I know that you said only 5 more minutes, and I think that was about 3.
Yes, I'm going to have to go one more question, and then that's it.
Okay. I understood that answer, but I believe that I could go to Russia right now and talk to someone who would tell me that that the person I'm talking, let's call him his name Igor, and the white people there would say Igor is not white, and Igor would be mistreated, and he and I would be sitting in the same part of a restaurant, and he would be not white. I'd ask all the white people around, and they'd say he's not white. Igor and I could get on a plane together, fly to San Diego together, and Igor's told, now you're white. And I ask Igor, are you white? And Igor says, yes, I'm white. And I ask any number of white people, and they say, yeah, he's white. And Igor wants to be white. And it's all in the same day.
Yes.
Is this
so Igor, according to counter-racist logic, Igor is now officially white.
So it could depend on the time and place.
Yes.
Okay.
Unless you perceive that Igor is acting under duress and that Igor is lying to the white supremacists and telling you the truth. But that's for you to determine.
Okay. Mr. Fuller, this has been really constructive for me. I hope it has been constructive for the listeners. I really appreciate the time that you took to speak with us all this afternoon. And, sir, you seem to always have something new to share with me because you're always learning. Thank you for helping me learn today, and I hope others learn something as well. Thank you for your time.
I appreciate being invited.
Okay, you have a good day, sir.
Thank you, and good night.
Good night. Okay, well, that was our afternoon with Mr. Neely Fuller. I had a constructive time. I hope others did as well. I don't see any hands up where anybody wants to have any conversation about the discussion and the presentation by Mr. Fuller. Seeing no hands up, I'm going to play the counterracism.com commercial and thank everyone for joining us this afternoon.
Is racism hurting you? On issues of race, are you unable to speak, think, and act with clarity and confidence? Are you tired of laughing when nothing is funny, smiling when you are not happy, agreeing when you really disagree? At counterracism.com, you can learn specific strategies and techniques to counter the behaviors of the people who practice racism in all areas of activity, using words correctly, following counter-racist logic, even counter-racist science projects designed to reveal what racism is, how it works, and how to counter it. The open-source code writing format allows you to pick and choose from a variety of counter-racist suggestions so you can produce the code that works for you. Stop by counterracism.com today and help replace racism with justice.
That's counter-racism.com.